This is a show where authors talk about their books, how they write them, publish them, and market them. We are on YouTube, The Writer's Dream. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page called The Writer's Dream. If you have a question for me or you would like to be on the show, please message me through the Facebook page. We're going to do something entirely different today. We have one author with us, but we are going to talk about a very timely subject. We have with us today Peter Ward, who is the director of the Lindenhurst Library, and we have Jack Bolello, who was the social studies chairperson at Lindenhurst High School. And actually, Peter was Jack's student. And because of the recent election and all of the issues that have come up about the Constitution of the United States, which seems to be under some kind of scrutiny, shall I say politely, what they're going to talk about is how the United States Constitution is being impacted by this election and some facts that people should know so that they can vote intelligently and move forward from this presidential election. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Peter and Jack.
Good morning. Let me start with a disclaimer. As Linda said, I was Peter's social studies and history teacher at Lindenhurst High School, but I bear no responsibility for anything that Peter may say during this program. So let's clear that up immediately.
Okay. All right.
Yes, as we start the program, my thoughts took me back to so many things that I may have mentioned in class that, as Alfred North Whitehead said, the great noted British philosopher, it is the business of the future to be dangerous, but not this dangerous. And one of the things that I've always thought about was that my favorite Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, not only once said, we can either have wealth concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, a plutocracy or an autocracy, or we could have a democracy, but we cannot have both. Because the most important title in any democracy is not president or senator or congressman or Supreme Court justice, but citizen. And if the active citizens play their role and do what they're supposed to do, our democracy can be safe, protected, well guarded. But if not, as Benjamin Franklin said to one of the ladies as he left the Constitutional Convention when she asked, Mr. Franklin, do we have a monarchy or a republic? And Franklin answered, Madam, we have a republic if we can keep it. So there are many who feel that our republic and our democracy is now facing challenges that perhaps we never anticipated or expected. So in your view, Peter, what are some of the key challenges to our democracy today in light of the recent election?
Well, I think what the recent election, the results and the reaction to the results may indicate to a certain extent, Jack, is that civic literacy in our country may not be where it should be in order for a democratic republic to be vital and for its citizens to be informed and for its citizens to be able to make informed decisions regarding their government. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking about the results of this election, because regardless of what side of the election people were on, you did hear people express certain sentiments where you would have to pull back a little bit and say, gee, I don't think that's founded in our Constitution. I don't think that's what the Constitution is all about. That is not what we are as Americans, as defined by the Constitution. And there are reports out there that says in the United States, civic literacy rates continue to drop. That, to me, is the most egregious predicament that we're becoming more aware of as a result of a presidential election.
Yeah, and it's verifiable that in this election last week, about 20% fewer ballots were cast than in 2012. And this was a hotly contested election, and yet it did not seem to spur our citizenry to advance to the cause and to respond to the occasion. As we know, in ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, in order to be a citizen, you had not only to participate in government, you had to actually govern, to have a share in the governing as well as being governed. True, it's a very small sample, maybe 20,000 at most in ancient Athens. We're not dealing with 330 million people. It's inconceivable to them. But yet, that concept of citizenship is something that seems to have been lost in our current environment. And one of the things that I would like you to respond to are some of the things that, issues that were brought up in this current campaign and that may have been a challenge to citizens and to our civil rights as a democracy. Some of the things that were ostensibly proposed as policies by Donald Trump.
Well, Mr. Trump did, President-elect Trump did make some certain statements with regard to deportation, with regard to libel laws. There are no federal libel laws. Again, they're about various proposals that he made that my sense is that they were formulated to appeal to Americans as consumers rather than citizens. One of the things that became an issue is the age. Every presidential election we hear, Jack, about the Electoral College. And especially when one candidate wins the popular vote and one candidate wins the Electoral College and therefore becomes president. Our Constitution says whoever wins the Electoral College, they become president regardless of how many popular votes. The thing is that a basic understanding of our Constitution is that the founders never thought that the president should be elected by the people. The president is elected by the states, and they had their reasons for that. And I don't want to get into the reasons that I've been reading about, but that's a fact. That's what we have to understand in our Constitution, is that the states elect the president. Now, the states, they determine how to put those electors into a room, and they all, since 1788, decided that it should be a popular vote. But the states can say, you know what, that's not such a good idea anymore. Forget the popular vote. We'll choose them another way. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen, because our history has been that we've constantly developed from a republic more and more towards a democracy, popular vote, one man, one vote, a lot of emphasis on voting. Whereas back in our when the Constitution was formed, it was expected by the founders that men of goodwill, men of intellect, would be the leaders of our country. Now, there were many people who said that didn't happen, especially in this last election. But that's the history of our Constitution. And I think every citizen has to have some knowledge of that, some basic knowledge. So going forward, if they do want to amend the Constitution, that they would be informed to that extent about what the founders thought our country should be, and then based on that, have come to an understanding of where our country should be going. Our country is not perfect. It is not a perfect union yet, but the Constitution says that the framework that the Constitution puts together allows us to perfect it as we go forward, perfect it. And that's the most intriguing thing to me about the Constitution.
Very good point. Yes, as a matter of fact, as we know that the Constitution, as it went into effect in 1789, was basically anti-democratic.
Without a doubt.
Only white men with property could vote. Women could not vote. People without property could not vote. The working classes, the farmers, which 95% of the country were farmers at that time, they were not able to vote unless they had substantial property ownership. And also, slaves were considered 3/5 of a person, not even a full human being.
Well, that's very true. The Declaration says all men are created equal, except you, and you.
You're
but we've
right.
moved beyond that.
Yes, the evolution of our country has taken place, but it's been in fits and starts. I
Oh,
mean,
without a
we've
doubt.
gone back a step,
Without a doubt.
forward 2 steps, and we can find many examples of that from, the Dred Scott decision, let us say, of 1857, in which the Supreme Court of the United States upheld that slaves were merely property and not human beings, and that a slave owner could take his property just as you could take a horse or a donkey or a wagon anywhere you went. You could take your slave anywhere you want because he had no rights that a white man had to respect. And that was Roger B. Taney, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was a slave owner on the Supreme Court. He was from Maryland, and 4 out of the 5 members of our 9 members were slave owners. So we have the Plessy-Ferguson decision, which said separate but equal was constitutional, that you could put one race in one school and another race in another school. And that, of course, was something that was highly controversial as the years rolled by. But we do have many examples of things that advanced the cause of our democracy in the intervening years. Now, for example, Trump has indicated that he wanted to put a ban. Not only did he want to deport 11 million undocumented immigrants, but he wanted to put a ban on Muslim immigration coming into this country. He wanted to restrict the woman's right to choice, which was upheld, of course, in Roe versus Wade in 1973. Very disturbing was his indication that waterboarding was something that he would pursue in order to stop terrorism from invading our country. And not only waterboarding, but he said it would be okay to bomb and kill the wives and children of terrorists. So, as you pointed out already, he wanted to change our libel laws because he himself has been the victim, not the victim, but a defendant in 3,500 cases, and a couple are still pending. On November 28th, he's going to have to defend himself against Trump University, and so on. So, what are right now, for example, interesting, within the 6 days since the election last week, about 150,000 new members have joined the American Civil Liberties Union in 6 days. And that is a pretty amazing fact. So, but what are the constitutional issues, the civil rights that you feel are directly impacting the American population? In other words, if you look at, like you pointed out already, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, the right to assemble, and so on, and that has been, are there any other amendments to our Constitution that you feel Trump has simply endangered?
Well, I think throughout our history, not only President-elect Trump, there have been, a number of presidents who said certain things or tried to enact certain things that were clearly unconstitutional. What President-elect Trump has to understand, and I hope he does, is that what binds us together as Americans are certain values that are embodied in our Constitution. He will take an oath in January to protect and defend the Constitution. So, if I may, I would tell President-elect Trump, I would say to him, my friend, my president, understand that as Americans, we all have different ethnic heritages. We all have different views. But there are certain values that bind us, okay? Freedom of expression, equal protection, okay? Due process, the rule of law. Those are the things, as President of the United States, that Donald Trump is going to have to protect. And quite frankly, he's going to have to take a look at some of the campaign rhetoric and say to himself, well, this cannot be, because what I said is un-American. It's un-American. And I, as President of the United States, am sworn by oath to protect those American values that are enshrined in the Constitution. And that's regardless of whether it's President-elect Trump or it could have been President-elect Hillary Clinton. That's their main job. Their main job is not to deport immigrants, not to come up with some tax reform, it's not to appeal to this class or that class. Their job, their primary job, is to make sure that the laws are executed and that they protect the Constitution of the United States. And you know what? That's a really, really, really big job, because there's so much pressure in this country to do things that go against the grain of those American values. And then for order us to stay constant, it's going to take a champion in the person of the president to stand up for that. That's what we need.
Good, good, very good. If you may permit me to make an example of something that happened in our class when you were a student at Lindenhurst High School. You may recall a student coming into our school with his shirt cut off, and he had no sleeves at all, and he was wearing a pack of cigarettes in that tucked-in part there. And our assistant principal, Etta Easton, who was a grand old dame of our high school in those days, she sent the student home, said it's improper dress, put a shirt on. And he sued the district on constitutional grounds. And he won. Do you remember the issue upon the constitutional issue that he sued the district on and won?
Jack, you're going to have to
I will remind you. I said he claimed that since he had no shirt sleeves on, that he had the right to bear arms. And you took me to task, Peter. I remember that. You did not buy it. You did not buy it, and I have to issue a formal apology these many years later for saying that to you in the class. But what, that Second Amendment, is that coming under assault, do you think? Or, for example, Wayne LaPierre, the executive president and officer of the NRA, is absolutely thrilled with Trump's election, saying that our Second Amendment rights are protected. But others, like 90% of the American people, feel that there should be reasonable arms control. Right to bear arms is important, but is there any limit to it? Or is it an unlimited right, as are all our rights either limited or unlimited? And that's a very important issue that we're going to have to deal with, as we have been and will continue to do. So some of the other issues, the Hillary was called a crooked Hillary. I'm going to put you in jail, and I'll have a special prosecutor, and so on. And so there are rights of the accused, and as you say, the right to a fair trial, the right to the presumption of innocence before you are declared guilty by a jury of your peers beyond a reasonable doubt.
One of our most important rights as Americans.
No question about it. So are these other rights that have at least come into question with the election of Donald Trump?
I think because President-elect Trump has made some very sensational statements, that people who did not vote for Donald Trump and people who voted for Donald Trump now begin to, they start to question certain issues that you mentioned. Now, as citizens, we all have a right to interpret the Constitution in our own way. The President has a right to interpret the Constitution. The Congress has a right to interpret the Constitution. But the final authority in that regard is the Supreme Court of the United States. John Marshall established the concept of judicial review, and that has been honored throughout our history. President Jackson, of course, ignored all the Supreme Court decisions, but the Supreme Court is the final authority. And with regard to gun control, there was a Supreme Court case based on a Washington law that restricted